I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who goes along with you. If I get drunk.
What's going on, Student Nation? Welcome back to the podcast. As normal, we've got a packed episode for you. We're going to start on the recruiting trail, where Oklahoma just hosted a massive Future Freaks weekend, and the commitments are just rolling in from that. Then we're going to head off to Nashville, where the Sooners men's basketball team is fighting for March Madness life in the SEC tournament, and maybe, just maybe, I'm not saying they're dead yet, maybe there's a shot for the NCAA. And then we're going to close things out with what is just can't be described as anything other than the unstoppable force of Oklahoma softball after another record-setting weekend at Love's Field. So we got recruiting momentum, we got tournament pressure, and historic dominance. We've all got it on this episode, so let's jump into it. Starting with Oklahoma's Future Freaks weekend. If you're a fan of Oklahoma football and you follow recruiting, this weekend was one of those moments where you just take a step back, you look around the college football landscape, and you realize something pretty clearly. Oklahoma recruiting is just absolutely on fire right now, because while fans are busy watching basketball, softball, and everything else going on around the athletic department, the real fireworks over the weekend were happening quietly behind the scenes there in Norman at the Future Freaks weekend. And everything was centered around this event. Now, if for some reason you're unfamiliar with it, Future Freaks is essentially Oklahoma's version of a massive junior day recruiting summit, okay? It's when the Sooners bring some of the best high school prospects in the country onto campus, particularly players from the 2027 recruiting cycle or whatever, whatever's the upcoming cycle in past or future years. But what happens is they get a full immersive experience inside this program. They get to tour the facilities. They get to meet the coaches. They get to hang out with other commits. They see what life looks like inside this program. And most importantly, they start picturing themselves wearing crimson and cream. And every program in the country does junior days. This isn't something that's exclusive to Oklahoma. But what happened in Norman this weekend, it wasn't just another junior day. It was an avalanche of recruiting. And you kind of had a domino effect with this, because within just a few short hours on Saturday, the Sooners triggered what can be described as kind of a commitment chain reaction. And it started with Jamison Roberts, the quarterback. That's Oklahoma's target at the quarterback position for 2027. He's a fast rising signal caller from Alabama who Oklahoma identified early. Give them their credit. They were in early. They offered him before a lot of other programs really jumped into the mix. And that belief in him early is what paid off. He committed on Saturday, and when he did, it sent a message to everyone else visiting the campus. You got the quarterback of the class. He's chosen. He's there. And then when that happens in recruiting, things start to pick up. Within a few hours, the Sooners added 3 more commitments. You got interior offensive lineman Tyson Ross jumping in there. You got a safety, a very coveted safety, I might add, and Jalen Scott. And then tight end Seneca Driver, one of the top tight end prospects in the country. And you think about that, 4 commitments in essentially the same recruiting window. That was just on Saturday. And that doesn't happen by accident. That's momentum. That's preparation. And that's what happens when recruits show up to campus and feel like something special is building. But you know what? That was Saturday. Then Sunday rolls around and the run continues. Oklahoma lands in-state athlete Graydon Howell, incredibly versatile product who can line up at multiple positions. He's going to play receiver 90% at Oklahoma. That's what I'm betting on. And when the dust settles on the weekend, what Oklahoma did was they added 5 commitments connected directly to their Future Freaks event. That is a monster recruiting haul, but there's a bigger story here. And the bigger story is what it did to the 2027 class overall, because after that weekend surge, Oklahoma, they didn't just have a good class. They had locked in what was already the number one recruiting class in the country. They put distance. Every major recruiting service has Oklahoma at number one, and there's distance. Some services have Texas A&M at number two. Some have Ohio State at number two, but the main difference is Oklahoma's number one in all of those, and not by a little bit. It is a comfortable margin where the Sooners are sitting right now. And when you actually look at the names already committed to Oklahoma for 2027, it gets really impressive. They've got multiple top 100 prospects that are locked in. Players like Cooper Hackett, offensive tackle, one of the best linemen in the nation. Cooper Witten, son of former NFL star Jason Witten, Oklahoma's tight ends coach. Caden Penny, another elite Oklahoma offensive lineman, locked in there. In fact, this class already includes 11 prospects that are rated 4 stars or higher by various services. And remember, this is 2027 we're talking about, okay? So these players are still early in the recruiting cycle, which means rankings are likely going to change. So you've got the good chance that some of these players are going to rise. And many of these recruits could climb to even higher ranks nationally. So the scary part for everyone else around is that this class could get stronger. But again, let's do what we do here on the Sooner Nation podcast. Let's zoom out. All right. Let's get a different look here, because Future Freaks Weekend, it's not just about collecting commitments. It's about building momentum and relationships early in the cycle. And this event is designed specifically for underclassmen, juniors who are about to become seniors, and the next wave of recruits that, programs across the country are already targeting. So in recruiting, obviously, timing is everything. If you identify players early, if you build relationships early, if you get them on campus early, you gain this huge advantage. And that's something Oklahoma's been doing extremely well since Brent Venables came around. They're not just chasing recruits. They're setting the pace right now. And when you talk about the biggest reason behind all this momentum, it comes back to the name that I just mentioned, Brent Venables. For years, he's built his reputation as one of the most relentless recruiters in all of college football. And now that culture has fully taken root inside this Oklahoma program. So when recruits show up to Norman, they're not just meeting coaches, they're meeting a staff that's intensely involved. The position coaches, the recruiting coordinators, other players, strength and conditioning staff, everyone is selling the same vision. And what we're seeing is that recruits are buying it. They're jumping in. And this staff right now, they're crushing it. I mean, look what's happening across this coaching staff right now for Oklahoma. Offensive line recruiting under Bill Beatonbow, it continues to be elite. Defensive recruiting, the pipeline that Brent Venables has built in producing blue chip prospects, incredible. Then there's a storyline that kind of really stands out because we're just scratching the surface of Jason Witten, former Dallas Cowboys legend, just joined this staff. He probably doesn't even have his boxes unpacked yet, but he's already making waves because one of the biggest commits from Future Freaks Weekend was Seneca Driver. I mentioned him earlier, the tight end, widely considered one of the best, if not the best, tight end prospects in the entire 2027 class. So that's immediate recruiting impact. And when you add NFL credibility to your coaching staff, recruits are going to notice, but not just the recruits, the parents, and then everyone else is going to be in there figuring out what's happening. And so your future is getting built right now as spring practice is just now getting underway. And what makes this weekend especially important is that it does signal something bigger. Oklahoma, the Sooners aren't just recruiting well. They're recruiting strategically. They're building classes around elite offensive line play, versatile defensive athletes, playmakers at the skill positions, and quarterbacks who can develop into stars. And that's how championship programs recruit. And right now, Oklahoma is laying that foundation years in advance. And here's the crazy part to all of this. Future Freaks Weekend, it might not even be the end of this surge. There are already predictions that more prospects could be joining this class, including another highly rated offensive lineman, more highly rated defensive backs. And if that happens, Oklahoma's leading this recruiting rankings. It could even grow larger than what it is right now. So what this means altogether is that, look, recruiting rankings in March, they don't guarantee anything. Players decommit, other programs catch up with you because at some point you're going to level off. And we've seen classes shift. Oklahoma has been a benefactor of that, and it's been something that's hurt Oklahoma in the past. Because like I said, players decommit. Other programs make late surges. But what this weekend proves is something important, that Oklahoma has serious recruiting momentum. And when momentum hits during an early cycle, it can snowball. Recruits want to join winning classes. They want to play with other elite players. And right now, Oklahoma's 2027 class is shaping up to be exactly that. So when people ask why Future Freaks Weekend matters, well, it's not just about the 5 commits. It's about the message that it sends. It tells recruits across the country, Oklahoma's building something. And if you want to be a part of it, you might want to get in early because the train is already in motion. And if this weekend was any indication, that train is moving fast and it's heading straight towards what is going to be the future of Oklahoma football. Thanks for hanging with us. This is the Sooner Nation podcast. We got a lot more to talk about. All right, so let's shift gears from recruiting and talk about something that's suddenly become a very real Oklahoma men's basketball program again, all right? March is here. And just a couple of weeks ago, it just feels, we haven't even talked about basketball for a while because it's not been great. But it didn't look like the Sooners were going to be anywhere near the NCAA tournament conversation. You go back a month ago. But now, they're not just in the conversation. They are right in the middle of the bubble chaos that's as they head into the SEC tournament. And it all starts Wednesday night for Oklahoma. This basketball team, they're going to open up the conference tournament in Nashville. They're the number 11 seed. They're going to face South Carolina, a team that beat them in the regular season. That's going to be their first round matchup, but it's a very winnable game. And this is a very winnable first round game for the Sooners. And then you win that game, the conversation is going to continue about rising on the bubble. You lose that game, and look, whatever momentum you've built to close out the season, whatever hopes are there, they're going to disappear right there on the spot. They're going to die right there in Nashville. And that's the reality of where things stand right now for Oklahoma basketball. When you look at their resume, you look at where Oklahoma actually sits heading into this tournament. They finished the regular season 17-14. They're 7-11 in SEC play, which isn't exactly the type of record that screams NCAA tournament lock. But this is also where things get really interesting in this conversation because the metrics say that Oklahoma is, in fact, right there on the bubble. They've got a net ranking around 55, Ken Palm ranking roughly 46. Their quad 1 record, 4-9, quad 2, 5-5. And most importantly, there's really 0 bad losses here on their schedule. They went 8-0 in quad 3 and quad 4 games, which means they avoided the type of losses that has in the past killed them and can absolutely kill you in the future. But they don't have that going for them right now. Most bracketologists in this moment have Oklahoma listed somewhere between the first 4 out or the next 4 in. And in other words, what we're saying here is that they're close, but they're not quite in. So what that means is, Nashville is where the tournament fate for Oklahoma is likely going to be decided. And here's the reason Oklahoma fans should feel at least somewhat optimistic heading into Wednesday night because of momentum. The Oklahoma undoubtedly is playing their best basketball of the season right now. They've won 3 of the last 4 games. They beat ranked teams. They beat Auburn. They beat LSU. They beat Arkansas. They capped the regular season with a dramatic 88-85 overtime win over Texas, on the road on senior night. So that kind of finish matters because the selection committee has repeatedly shown that how a team is playing late in the season matters. And for Oklahoma, that's a good thing. For a team like Texas, that's a bad thing. And the Sooners look like a team that's finally figuring itself out. And a huge part of that late season surge that we've seen has been what's happening in the backcourt, specifically Nigel Pack and Xavier Brown. Those two have become the engine of this Oklahoma offense. In the finale against Texas, they combined for 44 points. Now, Pack has been doing what veteran guards are supposed to do in March. He scores, he controls tempo, he hits big shots in big moments. Brown has added another layer of playmaking that makes Oklahoma harder to defend. So if the Sooners are going to make a run in Nashville, it's going to start with those two. Because in non-conference play, they were great. Conference play, they were kind of rough to start out with, but now you're in a tournament. And in these type of tournaments, moving forward, conference tournament, NCAA tournament, or even if they ended up in the NIT, guard play usually is what is the deciding factor. So let's talk about the actual road that Oklahoma has to take if they want to punch a ticket into the dance. Absolutely not going to be an easy path, but it is a clear path. And it starts with South Carolina. You got to win there. That's the non-negotiable game. You lose Wednesday to South Carolina, and this conversation, like I said, it dies in Nashville. Because a loss to a number 14 seed with a 4-14 record in conference, it would wipe out the late season momentum that Oklahoma has built. But if you win this game, things start to get interesting. Because then you got to move up. You would be looking at a second round matchup with Texas A&M. And look, Oklahoma went 0 for 2 against the Aggies, and everyone said it's hard to beat a team 3 times in one season. And both of those games were incredibly competitive, losing in Norman, losing in College Station. It would become one of the most important games of the entire season for Oklahoma. And here's why, because if you get to the second round, you face Texas A&M, that's likely going to count as another quad 1 victory for the Sooners. And right now, quad 1 wins are exactly what Oklahoma's resume needs. Most bracketologists believe 2 wins in Nashville, that's the minimum. It doesn't mean you're done, but that's the minimum requirement to move Oklahoma onto the safer side of the bubble. And that second win, if you get it, you're able to beat Texas A&M. That's the one that could push them, what I'm saying, into like that last 4 in conversation. And then that third step, Arkansas. So let's say Oklahoma pulls off the first 2 wins. They advance to round 3. You're facing an Arkansas team that you beat. You have had success against them. Now, it's going to be a real challenge. That's a quarterfinal matchup. But you get there and you win that game, that's where everything changes. Now, again, I never said it was an easy path, but it is a clear path. Because if you make it that far and you win, that would likely give Oklahoma another quad 1 win, a more elite quad 1 win, extend your winning streak to 5 or 6 games, and then give them the type of late season surge that the committee loves. And at that point, Oklahoma probably isn't sweating selection Sunday anymore. They're going to be in. And I realize what I just said. I know they didn't beat Arkansas, but you've got a tight game. Very competitive. Same way it was against Texas A&M. Same way it will be against Arkansas. And so there is a path here for Oklahoma. And you got another thing working in your favor if you're the Sooners. And that is the bubble this year. It's messy. You got teams from the Big 10, the Big 12, the ACC, all sitting in the same territory as Oklahoma. And when the bubble gets crowded, one thing matters more than anything else: signature wins. And Oklahoma does have some. We just talked about the win over Texas. You got the win over Auburn. You went on the road, beat LSU. Now, they probably need 1 or 2 more, and the SEC tournament gives them multiple opportunities to get it. You just keep winning. Survive and advance. That is the mantra of March basketball. And there's one thing that Oklahoma can't escape here. There's one thing that's just going to be the elephant in the room. It's going to be that brutal 9-game losing streak earlier in the season. That stretch, that's the reason Oklahoma's sitting on the bubble instead of kind of comfortably inside this field. Because when you lose 9 games in a row, you dig a massive, massive hole that you're in. Now, the good news is Oklahoma has been climbing out of it ever since. And the question now is whether they've climbed out far enough. So that's why Wednesday night's game against South Carolina, that's why it's fascinating. Because there's going to be some pressure here. The Gamecocks, they've got nothing to lose. They're already heading toward the offseason. Oklahoma, playing for their entire postseason future. And sometimes in conference tournaments, that pressure can produce 2 very different outcomes. It can make a team tighten up, or it can make a team play with incredible urgency. Which version of Oklahoma shows up will determine everything. And so if you're looking for a blueprint for Oklahoma to win this week, it's pretty simple. You got to do 3 things. Guard play has to stay elite. Nigel Pack, Xavier Brown, they've got to just keep doing exactly what they've been doing for the last few games. Second thing is defense has got to travel. Conference tournaments can become track meets, but the teams that survive usually defend at a high level. And third, you just got to win the close games. Because if Oklahoma advances in Nashville, odds are those games are going to come down to the final few minutes. And here's the reality. Oklahoma probably doesn't have to win the SEC tournament to reach the NCAA tournament. But they do have to make noise. That is undeniable. 2 wins put you squarely in that conversation of do you deserve it? 3 wins most likely punches a ticket for Oklahoma. And if somehow Oklahoma can catch fire and make an even deeper run, that narrative flips completely. Instead of asking whether Oklahoma belongs in the tournament, we're talking about whether this team becomes one that nobody really wants to face in March. And honestly, that's what makes this, I think, this week so much fun. A month ago, it looked like Oklahoma's season was drifting toward the NIT at best. Now, they control their own destiny in Nashville. Win games, build your resume, force the committee to take notice of you. And, this late season surge, if it's been real, the Sooners might just play their way all the way back into March Madness. Let's talk some softball. So before we wrap things up today, we've got to talk about something that's happening right now in Norman that honestly might be one of the most impressive, definitely one of the most fun stories in all of college sports. Not just college softball, all of college sports. Because while football recruiting is heating up and basketball is fighting for tournament life, what the Sooners are doing on the softball field is once again something that almost feels impossible. They are redefining what dominance looks like. And this past weekend at the Okana Invitational inside Love's Field, it was just another reminder of exactly that. Let's start with some raw numbers here. Over 4 games this weekend, Oklahoma didn't just win. They overwhelmed everyone in sight. The Sooners swept the tournament with victories over Abilene Christian and Louisiana. And again, we can talk about quality of competition, but Louisiana is no slouch. And the combined score across those 4 games, 29-1. That 29-1. Let that sink in for just a minute. 29 runs, 1 run allowed. 3 of the 4 games ended early because of the run rule. That's not just winning. That, again, is suffocating opponents, something we've talked about that this team is so good at doing. But the real headline from this weekend came in Sunday's game against Louisiana, the first game of the day for Oklahoma. In the 3rd inning, Ella Parker steps to the plate and delivers a moment that will be remembered for a long, long time. A 2-run blast. And that home run wasn't just another highlight. It was the 100th home run of the season for Oklahoma. They reached that milestone. Oklahoma reached that milestone in just 25 games, making them the fastest team in NCAA Division I history to hit the century mark. Now let's think about that for a minute. Most teams, they hope to hit 100 home runs over the course of an entire season. Oklahoma did it before we even hit mid-March, before they played their first conference game. That's the type of offensive pace that almost doesn't make sense because this lineup is loaded. And that's what, this is a very terrifying lineup for opponents because it's not just one or two players. It's literally everyone. Every position player on this roster has already hit a home run this season. From the top of the lineup to the bottom, there is power everywhere, all 9 spots. And you look at what's happening like with Kendall Wells. I mean, you can use the word freshman phenom here because she's been one of the biggest breakout stars in the country. She's already got 19 home runs on the season. That puts her as the national leader in home runs. And some of those home runs, they've not just been impressive, they've been legendary. One of her blasts this last weekend traveled more than 300 feet. That it might be legitimately the longest home run ever hit from that stadium, from Love's Field. And that's saying something considered the power hitters that Oklahoma has had over the years. Now, here's another thing. The home runs, obviously, they're loud. They get the headlines. That's why we led with them, because they feel the highlight reels. But the real secret to Oklahoma's success, what we're seeing is that this pitching staff is starting to take shape. So while the offense was hitting historic milestones this weekend, Oklahoma's pitchers were doing something just as impressive. Across the 4 games of the Invitational, the pitching staff allowed just that 1 run. Just 1. And that group includes the standouts like Wachino, Audrey Lowry, both of whom have been lights out in the circle pretty much all season long. Wachino picked up another win against Louisiana. She struck out 6 on Saturday's game. She controlled the game from start to finish. Lowry has been equally dominant, stacking up victories and giving Oklahoma second elite option in the rotation or the first elite option based on whatever you choose to look at the pecking order here. But when you combine the elite pitching of these two, and then you see Sydney Brazone starting to come on a little bit, you combine that with this offense, yeah, that's how dynasties are built. And look, freshmen, don't get me wrong, they're making headlines here. But you've got veterans, and they're still setting the tone. And you had a milestone moment from Alana Agbayani, recorded her 200th hit over the weekend. That's a massive accomplishment, and in any college career. But Agbayani's value to this team goes far beyond just statistics. She's the defensive anchor of the infield, a Gold Glove caliber player, right? Type of veteran presence that every championship team needs. And when you mix players like Agbayani, who is a seasoned veteran, with rising stars like Kendall Wells, what you get a roster that's it just feels unfair. And all of this has led to another kind of impressive number. Oklahoma's won 13 consecutive games. Their overall record right now sits 24-2, and that's the type of record you expect from a top 5 team in the country, which is exactly where Oklahoma has made their way back into. And if this pace continues, the very real chance that they're going to climb even higher. But at this point, you just have to ask the obvious question, is how does Oklahoma keep doing this? Year after year, they have roster turnover, they have graduations, they got new freshmen arriving, and yet this machine just keeps rolling. And the answer is something we've talked about. We've talked about it multiple times. It's just the culture under Patty Gasso. She has built one of the most dominant programs in the history of college athletics, not just softball, college athletics. Players come to Norman expecting to compete for championships. Kendall Wells came expecting to be compared to hitters like Jocelyn Allo. And when that expectation becomes the standard, greatness, that just becomes the norm. Now, look, Oklahoma, they don't have long to celebrate this weekend because the schedule obviously is going to pick up and not slow down. You got a midweek matchup coming up against Tulsa this week. And then after that, they get interesting because Oklahoma, they're going to open up a conference play. You start with Auburn, and that series is going to be one of the first true measuring sticks of the season because when you look at the critics, look at our social media page. We're progressing towards 18,000 on Facebook. But what are the critics saying there? Well, you haven't played anybody. Well, that means you don't know about Louisiana. That means you don't know about Arizona State. That means you don't know about Duke. But you haven't played anybody. Wait till you get to conference. Well, guess what? You're getting to conference on Friday. And Auburn has the type of pitching staff capable of challenging even elite lineups. And that's the big question moving forward. Can Oklahoma's historic home run pace continue once they face the best arms in the conference? I mean, it's natural for them to slow down, but dang, they're already at 100. So regardless of what happens next weekend, one thing is already very clear. What they're doing right now, it's historic. First team ever to reach 100 home runs in just 25 games. A lineup stacked with power, a pitching staff that barely gives up runs, and a winning streak that keeps growing. This isn't just great softball. This isn't just a great softball team. This is one of the most dangerous lineups that the sport's ever seen. So if you're an Oklahoma fan and you haven't made it to Love's Field, if you haven't tuned in to watch this game, that's something that you're probably going to want to fix. Because what's happening in that stadium right now, it's special. And the scary part is that for the rest of the country, they're just getting started. This is still a young team early in the season, a long way to go in terms of growth and momentum. So that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Thanks so much for hanging with us. Make sure you give us a like. Make sure you subscribe. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify. Wherever you're picking us up. Thank you so much for being a part of what we do. You find us every day, heartland-sports.com. All free content there. If you want to take a deeper dive, you can hit our subscription page on Facebook, less than $5 a month. And we take you just a little bit deeper into the conversations that everybody's already having about the Sooners. Have a great week, everybody. We'll be back to talk later on. Boomer Sooner.
But I would walk 500 miles and I would walk 500 more to be the man who walked 1,000 miles to fall down at your door. When I'm walking, yes, I know I'm gonna be the man who's working hard